On behalf of all assembled here today, I should now like to invite our newest alumna, Dr. Carol Hopkins, to address Convocation.
Sounds funny, right? It's my family over here. Wewe bonjour. No jem indigenous cause kaye mainga na dodem. Lene Eelūnaapèewii Lahkèewiit mede wana kwendao. Nigabe mede kwe. Nime kwenama wewe bonjour. But wewe benesi je ne cause minwa hanabenese je ne cause minwa zase gagijo kwe. We minwa nemama kirikaguskwe. I start by introducing myself as who I am truly. Nojem was a name that was given to me, my spirit name, that talks about my characteristic, my personality, but also informs who I am in creation. My clan, the Wolf Clan, also speaks about my roles and responsibilities to family, to community, but also to all of creation. The nation that I come from is Eelūnaapèewii Nation. My father is from the Munsee Delaware First Nation, and my mother from the Delaware Nation at Moraviantown. I also have grandmothers from Ojibwe and another grandmother from Potawatomi nations. I am so honored to be here today. And I want to say Chimigwich to Western University, to the Senate, chancellors, the president, faculty, and to you, the students who make up this community. I also recognize my family, my extended family, the people who make time to work with me, my friends, my grandchildren, my nieces and my nephews. Especially want to remember my teachers, who I also named in my introduction. They are the ones, especially, who helped me to know who I am and that I have purpose in my life. I want to say how especially honored I am that the university has recognized the place of Indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge is the translation of the sacred knowledge of the original peoples of this land. The sacred knowledge that I refer to in my learning comes from the Three Fires Midewin Lodge. Midewin is the way of the heart. It is known as a grand medicine society if you look up any of the writings of anthropologists that studied Midewin, the Midewin philosophy and worldview. It's not just a philosophy, however. It is grounded in language, the original language of the people. And in the language, we have an understanding about the fullness and the completeness of life, all of life. There's an understanding that life began before there was any physical life. And our story of creation holds all of our science and is the evidence base for our knowledge in this time. It's said that what the Creator gave to us at the very beginning, before there was anything physical, was given forever and all time. And then every generation of people that walk the earth have a responsibility then to understand the original instructions given to us by the Great Spirit. And that if we study and understand those original instructions and those teachings, then we will know our path in life. We will know our roles and we will know our responsibilities to others on this earth. I've been studying Midewin ever since I arrived at the community of St. Charles, Ontario. At the same time, I was studying for my bachelor's of social work degree. And at that time, it began a formal process of understanding the sacred knowledge along with Western-based knowledge in the academic system. And as I walked that journey, I was constantly trying to understand concepts in Western worldview, psychology and sociology and social work to understand how our people knew the same knowledge. And when I began to understand language, I understood then that we have a foundation of evidence in our worldview. That evidence is our creation story, as I said. And everything that we know about life, all the science, the mathematics, the psychology, the sociology, the way we understand people, the way we conduct research even, is all tethered in the story of creation. All of our processes and the way we understand relationship and how we work together is all tethered within the creation story. In research and the way that we conduct research isn't based on the problems that need to be understood and the hypothesis that answers those problems. The research is understanding our strengths and that we have a foundation of knowledge and that knowledge is forever growing and that we have a responsibility to translate that knowledge and that when we look for the strengths of Indigenous people, we have a much richer understanding of our role in relationship to Indigenous people. If we're only ever looking at the problems, then we're only ever going to see the problems. And that places us in a position of privilege, a position outside of those problems, a position of savior, a position of a person with the answer. And that will never work for Indigenous people and Indigenous communities and families. We have to have relationship. All of creation depends on relationship. If you look at the patterns of the stars, all of the stars have relationship with each other. And that's the pattern for understanding all of life. It's said by the story of our creation story that when creation was first being thought of, there was nothing in this world physically. It was all spirit at that time. That's the foundation of law, is spirit. And that as the Creator thought about what life would look like, the Creator imagined the most beautiful place where life would grow. That's the foundation for research, that we have to imagine the most beautiful place where life will grow. That sets us upon a path that is very different from looking at only the problem and only looking at it from a narrow perspective. If we bother to study what the strengths of a people are and what they have to answer their own challenges, to continue living life in the way that was meant for us to live, it's possible for us to work together and to find solutions that are meaningful to First Nations people, to Indigenous people. And so I've been fortunate enough to find good friends along the path that are willing to invest in that way of thinking. It's a different way of thinking. We held research consultations across the country with many people, and I asked very prominent, important, brilliant thinkers, how do we research strengths? And more than often, I heard the answer that, well, that's not the way we approach research. But I found some good friends who were willing to go down that path, to study the strengths of Indigenous people. And the result of it was the Indigenous Wellness Framework. And it's a framework that I suggest to you will benefit all of humanity. Because when we defined wellness from an Indigenous perspective, from coast to coast, across many different languages and many different cultures of Indigenous people, the result was a definition that was grounded in strengths, that was grounded in Indigenous knowledge. And the knowledge keeper said to us, if you want to facilitate spiritual wellness, then you have to do it by connecting people to their values, to their identity and their worldview. And that if we do that, the outcome is we create hope for people because they're grounded in who they are. And it's a strength-based perspective. The Creator imagined the most beautiful and perfect place where life will grow. That's how we are as human beings. And if we want to create emotional wellness, we have to invest in a sense of belonging. That's the outcome, is belonging. But we do that by connecting people to family, community, and to helping them with relationships that facilitate an attitude towards living life. If you have family, community, and relationships with family and community, it's possible then to have an attitude towards living life. And that might seem like a simplistic answer, but there are many people in the world that are not connected to family and community, let alone to creation. All of creation is our family. In Indigenous languages that are so critically important to our worldview and who we are, talks about all the plant life and the trees and the animals and sky realm, earth realm, as living life. They're not just entities for our use as human beings. They're living life. And our life as human beings depends upon them. So we have to be in relationship with them. If we have a relationship with the land, then we live well. The state of the earth, our mother, the earth, is the state of our well-being and our own health. If the earth is sick, so are the people. And if we want to have an understanding about the meaning of life, then we have to invest in our education, an understanding that there are two sides of knowledge. There's spiritual knowledge and there's the physical knowledge, the knowledge that we gain from learning with other people. But that knowledge and education is incomplete if we have no connection and understanding about what the Spirit, the Great Spirit, gave to each and every one of us as people. And only when we put the two together, the rational knowledge and the intuitive knowledge that comes from our spirit. And science discounts the intuitive knowledge. We don't just make it up, the spiritual knowledge. There's a long history of our spiritual knowledge. When we put the two together, and only when we put the two together, can we have a full understanding about the meaning of life, about the meaning of our roles, about the meaning of our responsibilities, about the meaning of who we are as people on this earth, and how to take care of all of creation. That's our responsibility. And if we want to know what is our purpose in life, everybody wants to know that my life has meaning and that I have purpose, especially as you're graduating and you're going to pursue a career. You want to feel as though your investment in your education is going to lead you someplace where you're fulfilling a purpose in your life. Purpose is created by understanding that for us as Indigenous people, we have a unique way of being. The example of our connection to the earth. A unique way of doing things. The example of research. Researching the strengths to bring them forward in a process of decolonization. Unraveling the cloak of colonization that has set aside our knowledge and our way of being and our way of doing things. That's how we facilitate decolonizing the knowledge. And we avoid what my good friend Dr. Janet Smiley says as epistemic racism. Do not participate in epistemic racism, which is the judgment of which knowledge is most credible, which knowledge has the scientific rigor that tells us we can rely upon it. It's not discounting that. But because Indigenous knowledge that comes from the sacred knowledge is not as accessible, you don't find it in the stacks at the Weldon Library. But it can be accessible by Indigenous people. And we can translate it to have meaning and application in our life today. And when we bother to invest in that process, when we conduct literature reviews, not just by what is written, but also what is carried by our elders and our knowledge keepers, carried unchanged from generation to generation. And when we add that knowledge alongside of what the literature says, we can get further ahead in terms of applying knowledge and developing knowledge that is more meaningful to Indigenous people. And so way of being and way of doing creates wholeness. And that's how we find our purpose. And so hope. Know who you are. Know where you belong. What are your gifts? What are the gifts that we gather from creation, from our connections and relationships? And what is it that we understand about life and our meaning and then our purpose? That's the Indigenous Wellness Framework, created in conversation with Indigenous knowledge keepers across this land. And again, I say to you, every human being wants to know there's hope for tomorrow. Our responsibility is not to leave the next generation or my grandchildren with fear. Fear about, will I have a place of belonging? Fear about whether I will still have access to sacred knowledge. Fear that the universities or post-secondary institutions or any of our institutions in society will reject them because of who they are. Our responsibility is to make sure that we understand each other, that all colors of man have a reason to have hope, they have a place of belonging, that their life has meaning and their life has purpose. And that if we live our life on purpose, we can create a better society. Reconciliation is about creating a better society, especially for Indigenous people. But it requires all of us to question our own belief system, our own knowledge systems, and to work in partnership with Indigenous people for how we can bring the two together. And it requires us to have a knowing about ourselves, that we can be comfortable in the discomfort of ambiguity, that the unknowing about Indigenous knowledge doesn't have to be a place of fear and rejection. That if we bother to learn the value of a different knowledge system, we can all benefit. That as Indigenous people, we have much to offer to all of society. And I thank you for the recognition through this honorary degree that really speaks to the place of Indigenous knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol, for your thoughtful address. As a leader in innovative research in the field of Indigenous mental health, you have been recognized nationally and internationally. Today, we are pleased to recognize you in your home community for the significant work you have done to improve the lives of those with mental illness. Distinguished guests, please join me in congratulating Worcester's newest honorary Doctor of Laws, Dr. Carol Hopkins.